G'day, welcome to Rocket's Fishing Adventures. Something a little bit different today. I'm not out on the water chasing bream, bass or flathead, but I'm in the garage trying to repair some damage to my kayak. A little bit of maintenance and a little bit of patchwork where I've almost worn it entirely through the bottom of the keel from dragging it across rocks and all kinds of hard surfaces during my adventures out in the bush chasing bass mainly. So yeah, it's not something I've tried before. I've watched a few YouTube tutorials myself, and I'd like to stress this, not a how-to video. This is just documenting how I've attempted it. It may prove to be a how-to video if I'm successful, but it's equally likely to prove to be a how not to video. So yeah, let's just see how it works out. Thank you. Okay, you may be wondering what I'm doing standing in my garage with an empty milk bottle. Well, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and take some of the material out of this milk bottle and use it to fix up some of the scrapes and gouges in my kayak. So what I'm looking for is this little number 2 symbol here. That stands for HDPE. It even says it here in small writing. I'm not sure if you can pick it up on the camera, but HDPE is basically the same material that kayaks are made out of. So as strange as it may seem, yeah, same material. I'm going to cut some strips out of this. It's nice and thin already, and I'm just going to use it with a bit of heat to try and work it into some of the gouges, the smaller gouges and scratches, to try and fix up the bottom of the kayak where it's copped a lot of punishment over the years. We've also got a much larger problem here, which I'm going to attack in a different way. But yeah, I'm going to try and build up that area because you can see here that there's a little soft spot from where it's been ground down over years of me dragging it over rocks and gravel and every type of riverbed you can imagine. So yeah, I'm going to try and build that area up so that I've got less chance that it's actually going to wear through entirely and start springing a leak on me when I'm out in the middle of the bush. No one needs that. So before I get started and attempt any of the repairs, I'm just going to give you a quick run over the kayak and show you the sort of condition that it's in and the sort of damage that it has sustained over the years. So as you can see, even upside down, it's a Malibu kayak, it's a Sierra 10, it's a sit-in kayak that I use for my bush bashing bass adventures. Because the areas that I go to, they're pretty rough, the kayak itself cops a fair pasting. And if you look down the actual hull there, you can see that it's just crisscrossed in all kinds of scratches, and there's some decent sized gouges in there as well. I'm not particularly worried about the surface scratches. That's going to happen. There's not much I can do about that. But what I would like to do is fill in some of these deeper gouges. Something like this, for example, and in particular this one here. I'd like to put a bit more material back in there so that if it does cop another knock or another gouge in that same area, it's not susceptible to go all the way through the hull. So yeah, all the little scrapes and gouges, they're not an issue. I would like to fill some of the larger ones in, but the really big issue is this part here at the tail of the keel. As you can see, if I hold something straight there, there's quite a large section there that's been scraped down almost to the point where it's gone through the plastic. That's really soft in there. You might not be able to pick it up on the camera, but yeah, it's very close to being a full thickness through, so that would start leaking water in the not too distant future if I didn't do something with it. I had a couple of options. Either I could patch it up with gaffer tape and hope for the best. I could send it off to a professional for some plastic welding and get a patch put on there, or I could do a little bit of DIY. I figured I'd give the DIY a try, because although this is an $800 kayak, if I can get away with spending only on the tools that I needed that I didn't have, this is going to cost me around about $40. So it's hard to imagine that any professional would take on a job for that sort of money, and if I can get a 3/4 decent result, I'll think that that $40 is a good investment. So my two little workshop helpers here, Sky and Terra. They're brother and sister, and they're little spotty troublemakers, aren't ya? Yep. Pretending you're all cute and good. I know the truth. I put together all of the tools and material that I think I'm going to need based on the videos that I've watched and my experience with that. Basically I've got some donor material here. This is from one of my old kayaks. I still have this kayak. It's one of my bush bashing yaks that's in reserve for when I've got friends that want to use them, or that I'm going to save for when my kids are a little bit bigger. So you can see the shape that I've cut out there. That's where I've put in a hatch, a round hatch. So I always save any of the poly material that I have when I'm doing work on my kayak, just for this kind of reason, for repairs. So I've got the actual material there for that I'm going to use for the big gouge, or the big wear spot. And then I've got some milk carton that I've cut into strips. This is HDPE2. It's just your standard plastic milk carton that's sold, or milk bottle that's sold here in Australia. HDPE2, the 2 in the triangle symbol is what you're looking for, because that's the same type of material as what kayaks are made out of. So I've cut myself a number of strips there. They're mainly to use on the gouges that run the length of the hull. So I'm going to use those. I've got some pliers to hold on to the material when it's getting heated, so that I, hopefully, cross fingers, don't burn myself. I've got a nice sturdy screwdriver here that I'm going to heat up and use to manipulate the poly. I've got a spoon here that I'm going to use to smooth the surfaces once they're a little bit more malleable and start to cool a little bit. I've got a nice sharp knife here that I'm going to use to trim any edges or do any little minor repairs. I've got some side cutters that I'm going to use for trimming my material to size as I need it. And I've got a putty knife here, because I've seen that a number of people use the putty knife. They heat it up and use it on these strips and press it into the kayak hull to fill up gouges and scratches. So I'm going to try using that as well. Got myself a pair of leather gloves here, rigging gloves, for a little bit of protection from the heat. Some sandpaper and a sanding block to try and prepare the surface and make it nice and clean and smooth. I've got some isopropyl, I think it's called, something like that. Yeah, isopropyl alcohol, just to clean the surfaces. A nice clean rag, some water. If things get a little bit too heated, I'm going to use a little bit of water to cool it down, and also there just in case there's any accidents because of this beast here. So that's a heat gun. A lot of people have these already in their garage. I didn't have one. I bought this one for 30 bucks off eBay, and this will be my first time using it. So it's got multiple heat settings, 1, 2, 3. Reading the manual, I know I shouldn't have read the manual, no man ever does, but I did. It's got 3 settings, and it says heat setting number 2 is the one to use for plastic welding. So I'm probably going to start at 1 and heat things up a little bit and see how that works, and if need be I'll go up to 2. This one's good because it's got a little stand here that you can use hands-free. So if I want to, I can set it up here and have my materials heating up and use both hands to manipulate the other things that I've got. I've set everything up at a good working height. I don't have a good back to start with, but it's just a good practice wherever possible to set things up at a good height so you're not bending over all the time. And I've set things up so that I've got everything easy at hand as I need it, or at least everything that I plan that I'm going to be using. I'll probably find something along the way that I haven't got, but yeah, I thought this would be a good start. Okay, I'm going to start by giving the area a bit of a sand, just to smooth off any burrs. It'll also have the added bonus of taking away any dirt from the surface. I am by no means an expert tradesman at any level, and I've just used the sandpaper I had from previous projects, and this is a number 2. No idea what that means, but seems to be doing a good job. So I've paid particular attention when I'm doing this sand to any areas that I'm going to be concentrating on, like this deeper gouge here. So I've given it a good rub over with the sandpaper, and next thing I'm going to do after I've finished doing all of the sandpaper prep is I'm going to use the wiping alcohol and just clean out those areas, because even to the eye I can see that there's dirt in there, and also the residue from where I've been using the sandpaper. So I've got my cleaning solution here. I'm going to give that area a good rub. Make sure I get right into that gouge. So the technique that I'm going to try and use here is, first of all, I'm going to heat up the area of the kayak, and then I'm going to heat up the putty knife, and I'm going to use that putty knife to mould in this strip onto the hot part of the kayak, and see if the two will come together. That's the theory. I like theories. So I'm starting on low heat. Now, as I've watched all of the tutorials that I could on YouTube, I've noted that the kayak material will take on a bit of a glossy appearance, like it's wet, as it heats up to the point where it starts to become workable. So that's what I'm basically looking at, as I'm keeping an eye on the surface of the kayak. I've only got it on a low heat setting at the moment, so I'm just taking it carefully. So that's basically at a low heat setting. After 10 or 15 seconds, there's no appreciable. It's a little bit warm, but it's definitely not to the point where it's starting to get a little bit liquefied. So I might pump up the heat setting to 2. Now I'm holding it a fair bit back from the kayak. I don't want to burn a hole in my kayak. I don't want it to catch fire. I just want it to heat it up to a working temperature where it starts to become malleable. Now this is the first time that I've done anything like this, so it's a bit of a learning process for me. So I'm going to take things gently, or I could probably jump in and go bullet a gate and get it very hot very quick. What I will do is start heating up my putty knife at the same time. So the surface still seems to be quite hard when I test it with the putty knife. It's not making any visible impact. Just now starting to cut it a little bit. So I might now concentrate on getting this putty knife nice and hot. And for that, I might crank it up to 3. Okay, so what I've learnt from that is the putty knife needs to be quite a lot hotter than that if it's going to have any impact at all. It's only just now getting to the point where it's a little bit sticky. So I'm just going to have to heat it up more. Okay, take 2. Heating the putty knife. Heating the material. All the material wants to do is stick to the knife. So I would classify that as a failure. The area is quite hot. That plastic is quite hot. Note to self, don't pick up the hot plastic. Okay, so trial and error. I'm starting to use smaller pieces of the milk bottle, heating up the general kayak area. I don't want to put too much heat on it. You can see it's already started to deform a little bit, but it had anyway in that area from where I sit. So yeah, I'm just heating up the area on medium setting. Then I'm going to bust it up to 3. Heat up the cutting knife. Just going to stick that in the area. Okay, it's a long way from perfect, but I can see that the theory and practice, I still need more practice at the theory. Okay, this is the result of basically my first attempt at trial and error. As you can see, the gouge has disappeared under a fairly rough layer of poly. Now there's a few little cracks and areas in there. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to sand that down, try and remove any loose material, and just repeat the process. The area is still quite warm, but not in any danger of melting. It'll just pop back out into sun if it distorts a bit. I'm not particularly worried about a little bit of distortion on the bottom here. The keel would be another question, but a little bit of distortion here is not a big deal. But yeah, I'm going to sand that out, tidy it up, and then give it another go. I've sanded the area down. It seems as though that it's made quite a good bond in the areas that have, like that area along there. It's this area in here that I just need to do a little bit more work on. Give it a little bit more of a hit with the heat on the palette knife. And the key that I've found so far in my very limited experience that you've seen is to use small pieces of this feed material. The big pieces seem to grab hold of the palette knife and want to melt onto the palette knife instead of melting onto the kayak. So the small pieces tend to melt in quicker and are easier to work with. The other key is a really hot palette knife. It needs to be able to melt that plastic pretty much instantaneously so that it doesn't take so long that it bakes onto the surface. So that's one area that I was failing in. So there we are, after a bit of trial and error, probably more error than anything. I've effected my first quasi repair to a gouge. You can see all of the material in there that I've used to fill in the gouge. One error that I've made is that probably I've left the heat on the kayak a little bit too long in one place, and it has caused a little bit of a bowing of the poly. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to turn the kayak over, and I'm just going to push that area out while it's still warm, and hopefully pop that back out. Okay, so the area that I was working on, there is a bit of a deformation there where I've been working on it, but you'll notice on the other side there's a similar pattern, and that's just underneath where the seat is. So it's obviously just an area that naturally does that from the seated position. So I'm not overly concerned about that. I have popped it up a little bit more while it was warm, and I'll continue to do that a little bit longer. I'm just heating up the palette knife again. I'm just going to try and fill in this long crack here. So a narrow piece of poly material. It's still very much amateur hour, but I think I'm learning as I go. That one's probably a little bit more obvious to see where the repair is than down here because of the difference in colour. I'm not concerned at all about the difference in colour. It doesn't matter to me in the least. I'm just interested in learning how to do this and doing a half decent job in the end. So I'll let that cool a little bit and then I'll give it a bit of a sand. So just sanding up that little repair that I did earlier. As you can see, there's a few little ragged edges there, but overall you can see that it's filled the bulk of that scratch. So was an interesting experiment. This is the next one that I've done here, and I've got a better result on this one. I haven't sanded that at all yet, it's still quite warm, but yeah, slowly getting better. Learning process. Okay, I've had a bit of practice now. I've worked my way down, just waiting for most of them to cool a bit so I can sand them off and have a look and see what they look like, because they look pretty rough at the moment, but I'm not here for aesthetics. I'm just here to hopefully make my kayak last a little bit longer. So I've got a little gouge here, and I figured while I'm here I might as well try and fill it up. Got myself a little bit of
fill material here. I'm heating up my palette knife. One of the things that I've found is that the hotter I can get it, the better the result. So I've heated up this area a little bit here. It's quite warm to touch. Some of the material stuck to the palette knife and some of it stuck to the kayak. So I'm just heating the palette knife up again, try and better distribute the material. Better. That's pretty good. I think that's one of my better little efforts there. Turn that noise off and we'll have a bit of a closer look at it. So it's obviously still very hot because I've just been working on it, and I've found it's better to let it cool before you try and sand it, because when you sand it when it's hot, it just scuffs it all up, undoes all your good work. You'd think I'd have recognised that before without trying it, but you live and you learn. So now I'll wait for that to cool and see how it sands up, and if need be I can top it up a little bit, but it wasn't a very deep area to start with. So yeah, note to self, it's hot.